This is Mission Sunday. We get to do this twice a year. And in October every year, we get to take a moment and just talk about what God is doing around the nations through this church and what God is doing around the world. And what an incredible moment we get to start with today with Operation Christmas Child. You know, as we get ready for the holiday season, it's an incredible moment where we get to prepare to give of ourselves, our resources, our time, our energy in a season where the whole world tends to stop for a second and think about what this Christmas thing is. I know it's overwhelmingly commercialized and that everyone talks about how much you spend on gifts, but in this moment, just for a few minutes today, I want you to think about how is it that God has prepared you for these next couple of months. How are you going to serve? How are you going to give? How are you going to give of yourself? Not just of what extra, but how are you going to give sacrificially? Something that costs you something to care for the needs of the world around us. Today is our launch point for our giving season. Last year we called it the Giving Tree. We'll have the Giving Tree set up next week, but today our Operation Christmas Child team begged us to get one extra week, 1 week early, so we can get people their boxes so they can turn them in before the Sunday before Thanksgiving, the 19th of November. So the boxes are out. You can get them today. As you leave, there's a table out in the plaza. There's a table in the front of the FLB in the Family Life Building just to the left of us here, your right. And we'll have those available for the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And next week we'll have the Operation Christmas Child, the Angel Tree angels out as well. And so in the next 3 weeks, you'll have all those opportunities to pick up your boxes or get your angels and start buying gifts. All of those things, all those items need to be returned to the church by November the 19th. That Sunday before Thanksgiving, so that we can get them to those organizations that will disperse them to these children by Christmas Day. You know, Operation Christmas Child has given over 200 million gifts since they started. That's an incredible thing. I imagine the FBC has been involved in that almost all of those years. And so what an incredible day. This year, our team has told me they'd like for us they've set a goal of 400 gifts. And so we'll see how the Lord will provide. But they're out there, and we're ready to start, ready to get going. There's a lot of other ways for you to give as well. There's several Christmas parties for different agencies that we partner with coming up. We have a lot of local partners that all have different events. So through some of our growth groups, are going to be partnering with some ministries like Moment of Truth, doing a Christmas party, or Meadowlands Kids. We're going to do a Christmas party for Meadowlands. Angel Tree, when we get all the gifts back, we're going to do a party for them on one of our Birdie Bright nights. So they can come a little early, and we're going to give them their presents, and then they can walk through and be prayed for in our church prayer time and the prayer garden, and of course the lights themselves. There's a lot of ways for you to be involved. So please know that today, as we go through this and we start talking about how God is going to use us and what is your purpose and what is the purpose that God has called us to, this is a very simple, easy on-ramp. If you've never done it before, get involved in one of these small ways. We're going to talk about some bigger ways as well. As we start today's sermon, we're going to walk through some things that Paul is dealing with. And as Jason talked about last week, there's seasons in our life. And some of those seasons change dramatically. And sometimes they come with no warning, where something happens that's just a moment where everything changes and the next season begins and you didn't have time to think through and prepare for what it might look like. And then some seasons, you know, if you've been preparing to retire, you know that when you retire, things look a little different on the other side. And so you prepare for it, you think through it, you maybe have a plan for your first year or two. When you're a college student, you're preparing for what's coming. Well, as we walk through this idea of these seasons, we're going to talk about how Paul has entered a very different season than the one we've seen him in most of Acts, as he's traveled and shared the gospel and planted churches all over the Roman world. Now he's stuck, and seemingly it might feel insignificant to him. He's stuck in prison. And it's already been 2 years, and now he's facing, like Jason mentioned, possibly another 3 years. And so what does he do when he's so accustomed to being out there in the middle of what God's doing, and now he feels sidelined? And maybe you feel like you've been in that place. But while he's sidelined, while he's in this moment, he writes this letter to the Philippians. It's a beautiful, beautiful picture. And he says this in Philippians 4, 12 and 13. He says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. And listen to this line. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want, I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Now this idea, these moments in our life where everything changes, sometimes we're tempted to despair. Have you ever been in that place where you're just bummed out, you're frustrated. If it's severe, maybe you're angry, disoriented, and not sure what's next. You ever wonder if God even hears your cries for help? Sometimes it's serious and life-threatening. You might think of the believers that are living in conflict areas today. Do you know that there are Christian believers that live in Israel? There are Christian believers that are living in Ukraine and Russia, and there are Christian believers that are living in Gaza City. Think about it. When they're waking up these last several, if you're in Ukraine the last year and a half, if you're in Israel or Gaza the last couple of weeks, you hear rumblings, you hear the sound of bombs being dropped. You wonder what's next. Think about the endless barrage of information that you're getting, right? Everyone is talking about who was killed and what building was destroyed and what family member is missing and they don't know where they're at. Just think about the overwhelming weight of it. Every day, there's this barrage of news of death and destruction. Some have lost their lives in these conflicts, and thousands more wonder if today they'll lose theirs. Sometimes our despair is not as visceral as that. It's not as felt. Maybe we find ourselves stuck waiting. Waiting is one of the worst things in American culture. Waiting causes us to have PTSD at times, wondering, how long do I have to get stuck in this place? I want to do. In fact, sometimes if you're Amazon order, you remember the day when they would guarantee 2-day shipping? Right? And then we went through the pandemic, and then it was like, well, maybe it's 7 days now. And now, some days, you get it the day after. Have any of you ordered on Amazon and it arrives the next day? It's shocking. But when it takes more than a day or two, what do? You get irritated. Now, that's a really small thing most of the time. But in our culture, we expect instant gratification. If you have to wait for a surgery a month or two or longer, or if you have to wait to see a doctor for 3 or 4 months, you're like, this is important. Why do I have to wait so long? That waiting grates on us. In our culture, we hate the waiting. Maybe that's smaller than wondering if life and death is going to happen. But in that struggle, we find ourselves often wondering if God even cares. Have you been there? So when we hear Paul, who's sitting in prison, say something like, I have found the secret that in any situation I can be content. Does that speak to your heart? Listen, I was like, I know what the word content meant, but I thought, what if somebody doesn't know what it means? And I loved it. You just go to the dictionary, and the very first word is satisfied. Satisfied in what one has, not wanting anything more or anything else. I thought, man, that again speaks to our American culture where we're so pushing for the next biggest thing. We live in Texas where bigger is better in every single way. Like, how do we get past this idea that we need more or we need better or we need something else? How do we find this idea that Paul talks about, this idea of contentment and satisfaction, even in the midst? Can you imagine Paul writing that from a prison cell? How would you feel if you were Paul in a prison cell? Do you feel like you could say, I found the secret of being content and satisfied in all manners of life? Well, as we think through this sermon today, we're going to look at this story where Paul has another opportunity to stand in front of some very powerful people. As I was thinking about this idea of contentment, and I was thinking about this story, have you guys heard of a man named C.S. Lewis? C.S. Lewis was an author. He died in the 1980s. He was a phenomenal apologist and Christian author, fantastic man. Many of his books I've read over and over and over again through my Christian life. My favorite, and this is going to make me sound childish, is the Chronicles of Narnia. I read them for a while every year, all 7. So I've probably read the entire set maybe 10 or 12 times. I love them. And for those of you who are like, well, there's not really great theology in there, I'll tell you, read them again, because there's some really good stuff in there. Well, he wrote a book called Agrippa Observed. And let me tell you, when he was 57 years old, he'd been single his whole life. He was a professor at Oxford. And he met an American writer. Her name was Helen Joy Davidson. They met and got married. And can you imagine the first time you're married as a 57-year-old? His life completely changed. About a new season of life. You go from doing things the way you like them, all by yourself for a long, long time, 57 years, and then you get married and now someone else enters into it. He talks about how she wrecked his entire existence. And he talks about how he would never prefer it the old way. She wrecked it for the better is the way he would talk about it. Well, 2 years into their marriage, she got terminally sick. And within 2 years later, she died. So 4 years from being married, he was now a widow. And he walks through this little pamphlet, this little booklet he wrote, it's like 60 pages long, called Agrippa Observe, walks through his very honest conversation with the Lord in the 2 or 3 years following the death of his wife. And it's unbelievably honest and transparent. There's moments when he says, I don't understand if you're even there, God. All of this, I put my trust in you, and this is what you've done to me. And if you ever walked through a really hard, difficult situation, maybe you lost something that was very dear to you, a person, maybe it's a job, maybe it was an accident, maybe, who knows what it might have been. But if you've ever gone through that place, you might call it the dark night of the soul kind of a moment. You know how you feel separated and lost and distant from anything that might feel like he cares. As he goes through this book, the last part of it, he starts talking, but he says, in the midst of my despair, I woke up one morning and for some reason, things felt a little lighter that day. And he talks about this kind of progression up and out of his depression and despair and his difficulty. And he says this is a quote from the book. He says, we were promised sufferings. We were even told, blessed are they that mourn. He says, I accepted that. He said, I've got nothing that I haven't bargained for. He said, of course, it's different when it's different when the thing that happens is happening to oneself and not to someone else. He said, it happens in reality, not only in your imagination. You start to think about how you start moving from this idea of, I know that people go through hardship, but when you go through it personally, it changes the way you see all of it. And the second quote, this is at the very end of his progress, at the very end of his book, he says this, he says, and now I come to think of it, there's no practical problem before me at all. I know that there are 2 great commandments, and it's time for me to get on with them. There's this moment where you realize that God is still God. He's big enough to take care of us, and he has a purpose for us. And so as we start walking through here, we're going to look at Acts chapter 26. Paul is still incarcerated in Caesarea. He's being held by Festus, and some people come to town. King Agrippa and his wife Bernice, they come to spend time with Festus there, the new governor. And they're filled with pomp and circumstance. It says there's a big parade to bring him into the city. And then Festus says, hey, I want you guys to hear about the story. The Jews in Jerusalem are really angry at Paul. And this guy's been left for me here by Felix. And now I'm trying to figure out what to do with him. He appealed to Caesar. But it's a really interesting story. They said, well, we'd like to hear from him ourselves. So then the next day they bring Paul out and he ends up getting to speak to them for some time. And the story is very, very incredible. It's very similar to the same kind of line of thinking that he's used multiple times when he stands in front of these big people. He talks to them about, for one, why he's been imprisoned unjustly. And then he goes in very quickly into the gospel. He starts talking about the resurrection of the dead and how this has caused the problems that has put him in jail. And so we're going to pick up here in chapter 26 and verse 1 when King Agrippa says to Paul, you have permission to speak for yourself. We're not going to read the whole chapter. It's like 40 verses. It would take up the rest of our time. So here it says, so Paul motioned with his hand and began his defense. He said, King Agrippa, I consider myself fortunate to stand before you today as I make my defense against all the accusations of the Jews. And especially so because you are well acquainted with all the Jewish customs and controversies. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. On one of these journeys, I was going to Damascus with the authority and the commission of the chief priests. And about noon, I skipped down to verse 12, by the way. About noon, King Agrippa, I was on the road and I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, blazing around me and my companions. We all fell to the ground and I heard a voice say to me in Aramaic, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Is it hard for you to kick against the goads? Then I asked, who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, the Lord replied. Now get up and stand on your feet. I have appeared to you to appoint you as a servant and as a witness of what you have seen and will see of me. I will rescue you from your own people and from the Gentiles. I'm sending you to them to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. So he's given just a real basic progression of his faith journey and what God has done in his life and what God was saying to him. And so look at verse 19. So then, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the vision from heaven. First to those in Damascus, then to those in Jerusalem and all Judea, and then to the Gentiles. I preached that they should repent and turn to God and demonstrate their repentance by their deeds. That is why some Jews seized me in the temple courts and tried to kill me. But God has helped me to this very day. So I stand here and I testify to the small and great alike. I say nothing beyond what the prophets and Moses said would happen, that the Messiah would suffer, and that as the first to rise from the dead would bring the message of light to his own people and to the Gentiles. Just a real simple, basic form of the gospel, right? And look how Festus responds. At this point, Festus interrupts Paul's defense. He says, "You are out of your mind, Paul. Your great learning is driving you insane." And Paul responds, "I am not insane, most excellent Festus." Paul's respectfulness is quite impressive here. Paul replies, "What I am saying is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I'm convinced that none of this has escaped his notice because it was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do." And listen to King Agrippa's response. Verse 28. King Agrippa says to Paul, "Do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian?" So in front of the governor, in front of Bernice, and in front of the court, Paul puts it to a question. Do you believe that the prophets, what they say are true? I know you do, King. Can you just tell me in front of everyone? Like right here. It's so bold. And Paul replies, "Short time or long, I pray to God that not only you, but all who are listening today may become what I am, except for these chains." Verse 30, the king rose, and with him the governor and Bernice and those sitting with them. After they left the room, they began saying with one another, "This man is not doing anything that deserves death or imprisonment." Agrippa said to Festus, "This man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar." Does it strike you that in front of these powerful people, Paul is not pleading for his release? He's pleading for their hearts. He's doing everything he can so that they would have an opportunity to have hope in the relationship with the Creator that made them. As we move through the rest of this message today, I want you to ask yourself 2 or 3 questions. One is the one that Paul answered early on in the sermon. One is are you content? Are you satisfied in your circumstance today? None of us are in jail, right? We're here in church. Now, if you feel like you're in jail, maybe we need to talk. All of us are here by our own free will. And God has given us opportunity to use the talents, the gifts, the resources that he's put at our hands and feet for his kingdom purposes. It's not just that you can come in here and be encouraged. We want you to be encouraged. We want you to see and understand God's word, and we want it to impact you so that it flows out of you in the way that you act when you leave this place. But are you content? Are you satisfied with the place that God has placed you in today? Paul found the secret of being content in all of life's circumstances. But it doesn't mean, listen to this, contentment doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean that it isn't hard. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't come without risk. Trusting that God is going to take care of you is not always easy. And so Paul found purpose in every circumstance. And so that's the question number 2. If Paul found contentment and satisfaction in every place, the next thing is he found purpose in each season of life. And so my question for you is, do you know your purpose in the season that you're in today? Do you know why God has left you here for this moment, at this time? What kind of impact is he calling you to pursue, not sometime in the future, but today? He's got a purpose for us here and now. Do you know what it is? Having purpose gives definition to living our lives. Remember the C.S. Lewis quote at the end of his suffering? He says, there are two great commandments. I better get on with them. Are you loving God with all your heart? And are you pursuing his gospel to the people in your life? It's living and loving him with the abiding peace, and it's fishing for men and teaching others about this kingdom that God has given us. If we are here, if we're alive and in the flesh, then he has a purpose for us. If we understand what purpose is, then finding out what it is, if we understand the word purpose, finding out what our purpose is becomes the more difficult part. Paul in our story from Acts 26 realized that his purpose that day was not to seek release. His purpose was to share the gospel with these leaders in their court. But Paul's purpose goes far beyond what was right there in front of him. Do you know that? Like if we talk about Paul as an individual, then his purpose stops right there. But think about the work that he had done the 15 years prior to his arrest. Do you know that the kingdom was continuing to move outwards because of Paul's work in other places? Do you know he writes, while he's in prison, he writes a book to the church at Colossae. We call it the book of Colossians. Have you read it before? It's a beautiful book. In fact, it's so precious because some of the things that he says in there that are unique. Well, guess what? Paul didn't plant the church in Colossae. One of Paul's disciples went there and planted a church, and the church had some questions, and so Paul wrote a letter to them specifically, even though he had never been there. Have you ever read the book of Romans? Paul didn't plant the church in Rome. In fact, he continually talks about how he always wanted to go there and had never been there yet. He was a Roman citizen, so when he writes the book of Romans, he's writing to a group of people that left Ephesus and planted the church in Rome, and he's giving them encouragement and strengthening their resolve. There in the capital city of the most powerful country on the planet. Unbelievably, God's kingdom continued to expand even while Paul is stuck in jail. And so my third question is this, is if you were immobilized today, if something happened where you could not continue to do the things that God has called you to do, would your ministry continue without you? This is a tough question for many ministers like me, other leaders in the church, because so often we're put into position because of what we see, what people see in us: gifts, talents, joy, excitement, maybe passion. I always get people telling me I'm very passionate. But if I was no longer here, would the work that I'm doing here at FBC continue without me? That's a good question for everyone who's in leadership to ask. Because we're not told to go and make disciples that don't do anything else. What are our disciples supposed to do? There's some whisperings. They're supposed to make disciples. They're supposed to do the things that we can do. That's why Paul tells Timothy in 2 Timothy, he says to pass on to faithful men, those who will teach others and others beyond them. It's a beautiful verse. There's 4 generations of teaching that goes downstream, and this idea that we're supposed to replicate ourselves in multiple levels. And so, are you content and satisfied in what God has given you? Do you know the purpose for which God has put you here at this moment in time? And lastly, if you were immobilized, would your ministry continue without you? If the answer is no to any of those questions, and I imagine they're probably all pushed us a little bit, then there's a lot of work to be done to help us grow in our character and our understanding, to help us grow in our preparedness, and for us to help grow others around us to do the things that God has called us to do. If you're here today, and who knows what opportunities God will bring you later, but you're going to have opportunities to live purposefully with your faith. The fact is, each of you are going to have multiple opportunities today to learn, to volunteer, and to step into ministries directly. You may not know this. I hope you do. We announced it about a month ago. But after our second service today, in the hub, the youth building down the hill, we have a luncheon for anyone that's interested in going on a mission trip in 2024. We've prepared 6 trips for next year. We're trying to find lots of ways to increase capacity because we had heard some people say things like, well, I tried to sign up for a trip, but there was no space available on the trips. So this year we have 6 trips going, 3 of them to the Yucatan, to the Cancun area of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. We've got one going at spring break that's organized for families. We've got one going the second week of June that's for youth, young adults. And we have the normal trip going the first week of June that James is going to lead that's for everybody. We also have a trip at spring break going to the Dallas area, DFW, to partner and work with the ministry there. And there's a lot of different ways that you guys can get involved. We'd love for you to learn about it. If you come to the lunch today, we're not going to assign your name to any lists. You don't have to be there. But we'd love for you to, if you're interested at all, if you're wondering if God's calling you to be involved directly in one of these missions, then come check it out. We'd love to hear and talk to you more about that. That's at the end of the service, at the second service today. You know, Paul had lots of different ways that he worked to share the gospel. Like I said, even in jail, it was very evident that he had this big passion. But if you don't know the end, when we get to the end of Acts 28, which is only 2 chapters away, the story ends with Paul in Rome, in prison, waiting for his trial in front of the emperor. And the story doesn't end. It doesn't tell us how did it go. Did he get to share the gospel in front of the emperor, or did he? Well, we know through church history that he actually was released. And he spent another 2 years or so on mission. Some think he went as far as Spain. And then he came back to Rome and was arrested again. And while arrested that second time, he wrote 2 Timothy. So if you want to know Paul's last words, you read 2 Timothy. It's a beautiful picture of what God has done. And he has some language there. As he's writing to Timothy, remember he said his son in the faith is almost his protege. Timothy was caring for and shepherding the church in Ephesus. And so in 2 Timothy 4, listen to these words of Paul. He says, "In the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who will judge the living and the dead, and in view of his appearing and his kingdom, I give you this charge." Or 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2. He says, "Preach the word. Be prepared in season and out of season. Correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. For the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. But you, keep your head in all situations. Endure hardship and do the work of an evangelist. Discharge all the duties of your ministry." This is some of Paul's last words, the last ones we hear him say. He's writing to Timothy and to the church in Ephesus. In verse 6, he continues, "For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and my time for departure is near." Verse 7, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing." Church, my hope as we conclude the sermon is to give you several simple opportunities that you can look at and pray about in the coming weeks and months that will shepherd your heart and prepare you to be ready in season and out of season, to discharge the duties to which God has called you, for the ministry that God has put in your heart and called you to uniquely. Another book by C.S. Lewis I love is called The Weight of Glory, and in it he talks about how every single addition, every one person added to the church changes the impact of the entire church. And what I mean by that is that your skills are unique. Your talents and the things that God has put in you are very different than the ones he's put in me. And if we didn't have you here, our church would be less able to do the things that he's called us to do. Every one of you brings unique ministry focuses that God has called you to. And we want to give you the skills and the ability to chase after it with all your heart. So here, if you feel inadequate, behind, ill-prepared for serving God, if you don't feel content or satisfied, we want to help. You know, we offer a variety of classes here at the church. If you're a new believer and you're just trying to understand more about the scriptures, we have classes on Wednesday night. We have growth groups on Sunday mornings that are walking through learning the scriptures all the time. Anytime you want to grow in your faith, we can help you get connected to somebody here that will shepherd you and disciple you and train you. And if you haven't found that connection, then please talk to us. There's a connection tent out there. We want to know you. Fill out one of those guest cards and just let us know you want to get connected. We want to connect you. If it hasn't happened, it's because we just haven't got our lines together. We want them to be together. We want to help you get connected. If you haven't had the opportunity to minister to those around you, we want you to have the skills and the ability. We want you to feel confident as God gives you opportunities and calls you out to do things that you know how to do them well. And so here's a little thing. If you got this magazine when we walked in today, I hope you all got it. These are incredible, by the way. The ability of this staff to produce high quality materials is really, these are the kind of materials you hand out and people said, oh, what magazine is that? And where did you get it? Well, actually, Robbie and his team created it. This is ours. On the back of it, beautiful picture of Virginia Moses. I think she's back there. I saw her a second ago. Virginia, great picture, by the way, in Uganda. There's a little QR code in the corner. And I would ask everybody to pull out your phone and click on that thing. What it does is it's going to bring up a simple form. It asks you for your phone and your email address, maybe a phone number. And then it asks you, are you wanting to get connected through any of the classes, the perspectives course coming up, the mission trips? Do you want to learn how to share your faith? We have a gospel conversations training we do regularly. If you're interested in that, any of those things, open that up, fill it out. We'd love to know who's looking to be trained, who's looking to grow. It's not a sign up for a trip. It's just let us know if you're interested. We'd love to give you information. Okay, so please take a moment and fill that out. If you don't do it now, do it later. Do it sometime this afternoon. On the back cover, this QR code, okay? It's right there. All right, almost pick up your pen. Okay. This is such a big deal for us. We want to know. If you walk out of this place and I talk to you in 2 weeks, and he's like, well, I just didn't know, I'm going to be very irritated with you. No one told me. Okay, we are telling you right here, right now, if you want to get connected, we want you connected. And there's 100 different ways for that to do that. So, yes, please do hear that and please stay connected to it. Secondly, I would encourage you to step out in faith and serve. Serve in small ways here. Serve in big ways. Get connected to the Operation Christmas Child or Angel Tree in the next few weeks. Get connected to one of these mission trips. We have capacity for 90 people to go to Mexico in 2024 and another 40 people to go to other places like Turkey, Moldova that we're going to do in early June, or Uganda in July. All those trips are designed to help you find a way to get involved in what God's doing internationally. But there's an awful lot to do right here. Don't think that's the only way to serve. There's lots of ways to serve. Lastly, we have a unique opportunity here in January of 2024. FBC is hosting the first Perspectives class that's ever been in Boerne. And if you haven't heard of Perspectives, I'm going to tell you just a little about it here in just a minute. We're going to watch this quick video to show you just maybe whet your appetite a bit. So I hope that video made you really excited. Maybe it didn't give you a lot of information about the course, so let me just give you a little bit real quick. It's a 15-week college-like course. So it's a heavy course. 3 hours of instruction per week, sustained by significant reading. How do you use your gifts and talents to impact the kingdom globally through your efforts? And it's a phenomenal course. I took the course as a missions pastor in 2006, and it so impacted me that really ever since then, things have never been the same. One of my friends says that perspectives ruined him for the ordinary. Like, it just changes the way you see yourself in view of God's plan and how he uses you in the church and around the world. And so if you have the time, it starts on Thursday nights, January the 18th. It runs for 15 weeks. We'll take spring break off. There's a cost to it. We have a scholarship for FBC members, but it won't cover all the costs. So if you're interested, it's going to cost you some money. It's a time commitment. It's 3 hours of lecture for those 15 weeks, so it's intense. But I can tell you, at the end of the class, it will impact you unlike anything you've ever been a part of. So please take a look. We have a booth out in the plaza today. They'll have some more information, and then when we get into January, we'll invite all of you to come to the first night for free if you want to come check it out in person. If you're interested in the class before that, please do talk to us. Registration is open now. Okay, so we've gone through a lot. Today has had a lot of different components from Operation Christmas Child. We've talked about mission trips. We've talked about perspectives. In the end, as we finish, I want you to ask yourself those questions. Are you content? Are you satisfied with the moment that God has given you? Are you satisfied with who he has made you to be? Are you satisfied in him? Do you know your purpose? Do you know why God has you here in this moment? This Kairos moment, the splitting of space and time, and God is here with us. Why? What is he doing with you and in you and through you? And lastly, are you multiplying yourself into others? If you were taken out of the equation, would your ministry continue? Are you investing yourselves in the people around you that can do what you do? And if the answer to any of those things is no, then we want to help. We want to help. We want to help you find your purpose. We want to help you find satisfaction in your faith. We want you to find how to multiply yourself in the lives of others. So, as we worship together, as we sing a song, I just want to take a moment. If maybe as we've had these conversations today, you feel like this is just beyond your scope. Maybe you're wondering if any of those questions make sense. Maybe you've never asked Jesus to be the king of your life. And if today you're hearing these things and you want to have purpose and fulfillment and satisfaction, then this is a great time to start. If you're a believer and you feel like those words just don't make any sense and you want to learn more, we would love to pray with you. We have a couple of prayer team members are going to be right here at the front. I'm going to stand here during this song. So as we worship, respond as God leads you. Okay? Would you guys stand?